Welcome to Daily Drive for Friday, May 29th, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, Mitsubishi is getting into midsize pickups with help from Nissan. More signs that Stellantis has a solution for its idled Brampton plant, and CDK's declining debt value raises concerns about future dealership tech investments. Plus, Ducker Carlisle analyst Nate Chinecko breaks down the impending synthetic motor oil shortage and what dealerships need to know.
If we can't get Group 3 base oils out of the Persian Gulf anywhere close to as much volume as we've been used to seeing, I don't see how this is going to resolve itself.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. The already crowded midsize pickup segment is getting another new entry. Mitsubishi will source a new pickup from Nissan, hoping to siphon sales from the market-leading Toyota Tacoma, Chevy Colorado, and Ford Ranger. A person familiar with the plan tells us at Automotive News that Nissan will build the pickup at a factory in the U.S. Mitsubishi did not give a timeline for the launch. Stellantis Canada CEO Trevor Longley believes the automaker is moving closer to finding a long-term solution for its idled assembly plant in Brampton, Ontario. Longley said Thursday, quote, "I think we've had meaningful discussions with the governmental partners and Unifor." Longley made the comments at the automaker's Windsor assembly plant, which was the site of celebrations marking the return of a third shift and the launch of the refreshed 2027 Chrysler Pacifica. Last fall, Stellantis shifted plans to build the next-generation Jeep Compass in Brampton to a plant in Illinois. And CDK Global saw a debt value decline in April, and that's sparking some industry concern that the dealership management system provider could struggle with future technology investments. Something like that could affect more than 15,000 dealerships that CDK serves in North America. Joining me now to talk about it is Mark Holmer, who covers retail and tech for us at Automotive News. Mark, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, Mark. So this story is complex. So first, explain what happened with the debt value decline and why it's concerning to analysts and investors.
Well, CDK was taken private a couple of years ago, and it being taken private, it took on a fair amount of debt. Something that kind of kicked into overdrive in April is some of CDK's debt, the value of it plunged. It went as low as 61 cents on the dollar, and it had another bond just a couple of days ago that went down to 51 cents. And that matters because it shows investors are worried about CDK being leveraged, and it's over leveraged, meaning having too much debt. And if CDK has too much debt, there's a risk down the line that may not be able to invest in much in technology and innovation that needs to remain competitive.
S&P and Moody's seem to think this is a manageable situation for CDK. What are they saying?
Basically, they see a lot of these things as potentially solvable. CDK had some one-time expenses this year, including settling over $700 million regarding two lawsuits over antitrust issues. And it's had a healthy renewal cycle, though it lost two major customers. But it is keeping customers, it's adding new ones, and there's every chance that the company can succeed. But that is a point of concern.
So what do dealers who use CDK need to know going forward?
It's business as usual. In the short term, it's business as usual. They've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in modernizing their systems. So they've brought AI and other innovations to their customers, and that should continue in the short term. But if the debt value situation worsens, these bonds come due and they need to refinance. And if there's trouble refinancing, then there could be some issues. And so longer term, the company's stability is something to watch for.
Perfect. Mark Holmer, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. Coming up, a closer look at the looming synthetic motor oil shortage and what dealership service drives need to do to prepare. That's next on Daily Drive.
Who owns your car's data? You or the automaker? On this week's episode of the Automotive News Shift podcast, I'm joined by Richard Ward, Executive Director of the American Vehicle Owners Alliance. That's a coalition that's been backing legislation that would give vehicle owners unrestricted access to raw vehicle data. And Ward says the principle is simple.
If it's the car you own or purchased or leased, that data that the car is generating is yours. And so we often say, my car, my data.
We talk about what's at stake for consumers, fleets, repair shops, and insurers, and why this fight is only intensifying as vehicles generate more and more data. I'm Molly Boygon. Join me on Shift, available this Sunday wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. As we said on Thursday's show, the U.S. will probably run out of the main ingredient needed to produce synthetic motor oil in June. The Independent Lubricant Manufacturers Association says the motor oil shortage will probably last until at least mid-2027. Nate Chineko is principal at Ducker Carlisle. He joins Automotive News senior retail editor Dan Shine to talk about what's going on and what dealerships need to do now to prepare.
Nate, thanks so much for joining me on Daily Drive.
Hi, Dan. Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
So we want to talk about this motor oil, engine oil shortage that is happening here. Definitely not maybe reached all dealership level yet, but I talked to some and they're not having problems yet. Others are having problems. When did this kind of come onto your radar at Ducker Carlisle?
I spoke through some of the strategy project work that we do. I spoke to all four of the biggest motor oil producers about 4.5 weeks ago now. And they were varying degrees of concern at the time that we spoke. So that's really when we started to dig into this and identify the major risks and the few opportunities that this presents. And since then, it has gotten worse, not better, because the longer the Iran war continues and the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, the longer this goes on.
Let's start with the risks. What are the risks, the bad case scenarios? If I guess as we sit here today and as we continue maybe down this path for a while.
Sure. So the background, which I'll keep brief, is that a substantial portion, a little less than half, like mid 40% range of the motor oil base stock that we use to refine into what makes up synthetic motor oil in the US comes from the Persian Gulf. And when oil comes from the Persian Gulf, normally that's fine. Right now, that's deeply not fine. So there's not enough coming in. And other oil reserves around the world are going down, not up. So this particularly presents a problem for synthetic motor oil, or like what marketing people term as synthetic motor oil, which unfortunately happens to affect like pretty much every car made in the last 10 years. And for dealers, that is the vast majority of the cars that flew through their service lanes are cars made within the last 10 years, or really within the last 7 years. So the most challenging problem is going to be for dealers, can you get enough motor oil to service all of the cars that are coming through the service lanes? And we've heard from OEMs varying degrees of shorter allocations from their oil companies than they were hoping for, ranging between we're going to get 20% less to we're going to get 35% less, we're even going to get 40% less. When you see a shortage in supply, naturally that's a problem because you may, that particular day, you're out of luck. You don't have enough oil or you're worried about where the next batch is going to come from. You're running a little low. It will inevitably lead to price increases, which have already started to hit OEMs and getting passed through the dealers. And that's like the most clear and obvious concern right now.
And is it just a matter of if I am willing to pay whatever the rising cost is, I will always have supply? Or at some point, again, if this continues on the way that it's going, it won't matter how much money you have, there's just not any left.
This is an interesting supply and demand puzzle and forced me to crack open the college textbook again after many years of not needing to use it. So I think there are a few things that could happen. One is the industry is not really set up to create more synthetic motor oil than we needed at steady state. And steady state was quite steady because it's fairly predictable what the demand is going to be for a highly inelastic good, like where the price does not really affect the demand, like something like synthetic motor oil or gasoline, which are both very inelastic. Like you need them. This is a little different than in the COVID days, the toilet paper shortage, the infamous toilet paper shortage, because toilet paper is like, okay, there are substitutes that nobody really wants to admit are substitutes, but there are substitutes. And also, it's just not that hard for a toilet paper factory to add a second shift, add a third shift, overproduce. And at a certain point, like you simply just don't need any more toilet paper in your house than you already have. So it was naturally always going to level out. That was more of a hoarding thing. And then it leveled out. So it's like a really short-term spike. This is a long-term, by long-term, I mean like 3+ months reduction in supply coming into the market. And so we can't just turn on more oil supply coming into the market. And even if you could get the base stock, then like the refined capacity is different and it's really not set up to do that. So I just don't think that there's a lot of extra oil out there to make up the difference, which means inevitably price increases. But I also think that at a certain point, there just won't be enough. And some people will go short. I was not alive in the 70s for the fuel crisis, but it strikes me as pretty similar to that, where there was a supply issue. There was also a big difference is that back in the 70s, there was also price controls that caused the gasoline shortages, but there's supply issues. So then there's some rationing that has to happen. Okay, you can go on Monday. Dan, you can go on Tuesday. I can go on Wednesday to get gasoline. And I wouldn't be super surprised to see motor oil run somewhat similarly to that, where today you're lucky you got filled and you've got enough oil for 3 weeks, and then you're going to be short for a little while. And then tomorrow Jiffy Lube gets filled. And then the next day Walmart gets filled. And the day after that Valvoline gets filled, but nobody's getting quite as much as they actually need. So then customers are forced to shop around. And that's bad news for dealers because the more customers shop around, there's always an opportunity that you may not get them back. Could also be good. If you're the one who has the oil, people have to come to you who might not have otherwise come to you, and then you have an opportunity to retain them.
Right. We talked about opportunities. I think if I'm right here, Persian Gulf, like you said, manufactures a lot of this oil, but I think the other kind of center I've heard is Korea. Is that a place that can maybe up its supply at all to, in the meantime, while this is kind of going on in the Persian Gulf?
So Korea has already started some export controls on all oil, not just motor oil. So I think they're more likely to keep it for domestic use than we are to be able to get all of our motor oil from Korea. The Asian supply is a little bit more interesting when we get to the tires topic, which uses a lot of oil, but that's a separate daily drive for you. So I don't think Korea is a great solution to the problem. Different oil majors are feeling different levels of shortages. Some are really hurt and some are less hurt. And so it is probably a worthwhile time to ask this question and consider shopping around, which is a little harder for OEMs and franchise dealers who are on the OEM oil program because you have limited choices, whereas your aftermarket competition is a lot less loyal to one brand.
So where do we go from here? What's the light at the end of the tunnel, if there is one?
So
is it a train or is it a light?
So 4.5 weeks ago, my advice would have been fill up your bulk tanks and buy some packaged goods. It's probably too late for that. So in the present day, we are recommending a really detailed, like almost economic level analysis of those supply and demand curves for your customer base in your specific area to figure out how much should you buy, how much should you pay, and how much would you be able to sell it for. And that goes true for installers and also for the wholesale business, by the way. What is going to take to get it to resolve? That's probably a question for people in much higher positions of power than I'm in. But if we can't get Group 3 base oils out of the Persian Gulf anywhere close to as much volume as we've been used to seeing, I don't see how this is going to resolve itself.
And even if I've heard that even if things were, a peace accord or whatever was signed tomorrow, that this, automatically is not going to fix itself in the next week, that it's several months down the line before all the supply chain is filled up again and we're back to normal.
Yeah, I'll try to lay this out for you linearly as I see it. So, like you said, everything's resolved tomorrow. Everybody's happy. Everybody shakes hands. There's lasting peace. And everybody knows that it's going to last, which that's concern number one, is do people trust that it's going to last? But let's assume that people will trust that it's going to last. There are a bunch of sea mines in the Strait of Hormuz that are, depending on your level of military intelligence, and mine is approximately 0, will either slow shipping down a lot or just a little. So that's a hindrance to the whole issue. Shell's Pearl GTL plant, which makes a large proportion of the Group 3 base oils in the Gulf, this was in Qatar, was bombed and half of it is offline for at least a year. So that's like a natural supply limit that you could probably overcome, but you'll definitely see different prices. So that's a big risk. So now I'm starting to lay out like some of the supply limitations and slowdowns in the supply chain. Then you have to get the oil into the ships, which means the ships have to get in. Like a lot of the ships in there are already full of oil, so you got to get new ships in. And then to round trip, like to come over to the US is 5 to 7 weeks or so, up to 8, depending on like the route that you take, which is always a little bit up in the air. Then you got to unload, then you got to process, then you got to get it through. So it's like bare minimum a few months. However, this is made ever more complicated by the fact that pretty much every country who has a strategic petroleum reserve, the US, Europe, China, has been gradually depleting their petroleum reserve. So you might start to see motor oil come back in quantity, but you are not going to see prices come down for an even longer time, because until the oil reserves are back up to a healthy level, and honestly, probably well above the level that we previously thought was a healthy level because we did not anticipate something like this would happen, then prices will remain elevated for a long time. Those reserves help buffer the issue on the oil price side, but they won't help you get motor oil out because they don't hold motor oil, they just hold oil.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own Mark Homer, Hans Greimel, and Nato Akamura for their reporting for today's podcast. We also had reporting from Grace Macaluso of our sibling publication, Automotive News Canada. You can get the latest news on the motor oil shortage, new products, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back over the weekend for our Weekend Drive edition of the show. Our own Lindsay Van Hully and Molly Boygon break down the week's biggest news stories, including how global automakers are adapting to a U.S. ban on Chinese hardware and software.
It remains to be seen whether these companies are going to seek authorizations from the Commerce Department, to what extent they're moving supply chains, moving around organizational structures to accommodate this.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoyed the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.